Hello, everyone, and welcome to the semifinals. We have 4 games left in our March Madness tournament, meaning we only have 3 videos left. Before we used to do 2 matchups per video, now we're down to 1 matchup. We're still going to try to limit ourselves to like 15-20 minutes. We don't want to go overboard the way we have for some things. But, you know, we want to still have a good discussion on this, and we want the videos to kind of focus on the matchup now. So there'll be 3 videos left. Semifinal matchup A, semifinal matchup B, and then the grand finale. So yeah, the first matchup that we'll be talking about, and the matchup for this video, is going to be Metroid Prime versus Persona 5. 2 games that I think are deserving of a spot in the Final Four. I think they're both wonderfully designed games. Persona 5 is a more modern game that everyone fell in love with. Metroid Prime is a GameCube game that's a bit older. It's not, I wouldn't call it a retro game yet, though I guess it's on the cusp of that. Regardless, it's a legendary game with a beautiful story, an amazing soundtrack.
Technically retro.
I guess it would be, huh?
Retro Studios.
Yeah, you know, very funny, Travis.
Thank you.
But they're both great games. You know, it's going to be fun to compare these two. I think Nick always talks about accomplishing a goal, right? And which game accomplished their goal better.
I don't care about that anymore. Ocarina of Time's out. Throw that line of logic out the window.
Well, because I was going to say Metroid Prime and Persona 5 accomplished their goals perfectly. I don't think either of these games missed the mark on what they were trying to accomplish. It's hard. I don't know what we're going to be able to look at to decide which game is better. I guess if we just talk about things across the board. But it's hard because both of these games, I'm trying to figure out where one of these games went wrong and what these games could have done better. Other than being super nitpicky and saying Persona 5 could have been shorter or Metroid Prime could have been a little bit more clearer. But if Metroid Prime gave you more direction, it would defeat the purpose of the exploration. And if Persona 5 was a little bit shorter, it would defeat the purpose of the character development. So every nitpick for these games, I feel like, was done for a justifiable reason. So I don't know if there's a place that we want to start debating these. I feel like anywhere would be good.
Samus is a badass protagonist until Other M.
Yeah.
Which one had the story centered around them better? Who had the stronger protagonist? Which for me, Ocarina of Time. No, I'm not going to get into that. That was just messing around.
You can tell we just recorded that video last.
Real talk though. In terms of a game being structured around, you have to have a compelling protagonist. That's just. You have to. If not, it just kind of becomes bland, and it's actually one of my. And I know I'm bringing a different game into this, but it's why I didn't really fall in love with the Alliance Alive. I thought it was a good JRPG for the 3DS, and I'm happy it's coming out for Switch, and I would recommend it to a lot of people. It didn't encapsulate me as much as a lot of JRPGs would do. The issue is the fact that. You gotta give them a reason to care. And the way that these 2 games approach it is very, very different. And sometimes it comes down to just the way that the genre is structured. Through Metroid, it's a lot through it's a lot through exploration. It's a lot through, again, scanning just to get like the bits and parts to piece together the details yourself. And that's one of the great things about Metroid. Samus is just a badass bounty hunter that is basically against Ridley and whatnot. Again, I forget like the main people, but either you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And it's very, very good. In terms of speaking for Joker in Persona 5, I don't know as much about him, but the who you structure a game around has to be good. Because one of the flaws that I felt like was big with Xenoblade Chronicles 2, even though it's my favorite Xenoblade game, is the fact that Rex is a weak protagonist. He's a good protagonist. He does the job that's needed. He's not compelling. He doesn't make you think more about it. He's kind of just there and says the things he needs to say. He doesn't go beyond that in any way. I would say both Joker and Samus probably excel at what they do, but I'm wondering, is there one that rose to the occasion higher?
It's hard because they're both designed in the same way that Link is designed, in the same way that a lot of silent protagonists are designed, where you're supposed to embrace it. So you're supposed to become Samus, right? Like, she doesn't talk a lot because you're supposed to be her, right? I remember that's what Nintendo did with Link, right? Is the reason they made Link a silent protagonist is so he doesn't build his own character personality. You sort of take on that role. And that's exactly what Joker's like in Persona 5 too, for being the protagonist. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue, if any, really at all. You're supposed to embody him, right? You make the decisions of what you want him to be like, and that's kind of what Samus is like too. Samus doesn't have dialogue options, but she's kind of an empty shell. Not in a bad way, but she's meant for you to kind of take on that role of Samus. So they both excel at that. I would say from a story-driven perspective, obviously Joker's going to be a little bit better at that, but that's because Persona 5 is a very story-rich game. Honestly, I think my heart would give a point to Metroid Prime for that, though. Persona 5, and it needs to because of how deep it is, has a ton of exposition. And again, it's needed because of how complicated the plot is. Metroid Prime has zero exposition. Metroid Prime tells its story without having to tell anything, which I think is incredible.
Yeah.
So not only is Samus quiet, the whole game is quiet, but it's telling you so much, which I think is... I don't know how they do that, but there's so much lore in a game that doesn't have a lot of dialogue, which I think is awesome. Persona 5 has a lot of lore, but that's because it tells you all of it. Metroid does it without telling you anything, which I think is such an incredible feat. So in terms of storytelling, I'd give a point to Metroid Prime because it doesn't have to tell the story in order for you to understand what's going on, which I think is incredible to me.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I was going to bring that up if you didn't, because obviously Persona 5 is, like, here's the story, here's what it's going to be, deal with it, but it's a perfect story, so it's okay. And then Metroid Prime is like, you're here, go. You'll figure things out if you want to, or you can just shoot things and it's still going to be really fun and a good experience.
Right.
I was going to say, how about this? This is what I kind of see it as. This is a trap that a lot of JRPGs fall into as well, because they kind of become very focused on the dialogue, if anything. And I always find, and I think a lot of people say so as well, it's always better to show, don't tell the gameplay, which is, again, one of the really big issues that Fire Emblem Fates had. The fact that even though there was a story, and even though conceptually it was a good idea, they did a lot of telling, not a lot of showing in the gameplay. And that's one of the things that Metroid Prime excels on, is the showing of the gameplay. The fact that you're getting in the pieces and you're able to construct the narrative yourself. And again, that's why I point out the genre, because it's kind of harder to do that with a JRPG. But that's one of the things that I think is such a big strength about Metroid Prime, is because it does the show don't tell kind of gameplay approach, that it's able to do so in the genre. So I'm not sure if it's enough to actually like swing it completely into Metroid's favor, but I do want to say that, because again, Persona 5 tackles a lot of harder themes, it does show a lot in terms of knowing how to tell a story, and how to tell the story engages the person better. One of the reasons why I actually fell in love with How I Met Your Mother as a TV show is because there were so many ways they told the story that was different. It was never just a cookie cutter method that a lot of just sitcoms can fall into. They switch up the narrative constantly, and the fact that Metroid does that so well is just beyond my understanding. And the fact they did it in a GameCube game just makes it better. The fact that there was even more hardware limitations, and they were still able to deliver on that front.
Yeah. It's tricky because, like you said, I have to ask myself, did Persona 5 need all of that dialogue? And I'm sure there's pieces it could have taken out, but as a whole, is there any way that game could have been orchestrated to where it didn't need it? I don't think there is a way. I think when you're talking about issues, again, some of the issues they talk about are like suicide and all of that stuff, I feel like you need to have that in-depth dialogue to really show how the characters are feeling. It's hard to showcase feelings about complicated issues without dialogue. Metroid Prime, again, luckily didn't need to do that, right? With Metroid Prime, it didn't need to show you how Samus was feeling or other characters were feeling. So I guess it had less of a need for all that dialogue, right? Persona 5 needs that to kind of showcase what it's trying to be. Metroid Prime just didn't. But again, Metroid Prime, the other thing I want to talk about is exploration. Metroid Prime exploring in that game never feels tedious. At least to me it did. I don't know how it felt for you, Travis, when you played through it. But
only when I unlocked something and then it showed me that it had to go through the magma part, and if I had to go all the way across. But even then, I would usually find another missile set that I never thought to look at before. So I was never pissed off about it.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the general vibe, right? And I think that's impressive, because the other thing about Metroid Prime is there's a lot of backtracking in that game and going through older areas, but it doesn't bore you. When you're going back to an older area, you don't feel like, oh, this is tedious and ridiculous. Sometimes, you said, it might feel a little bit repetitive, but for the most part, it's fun because when you backtrack and you go to a different area, you find new things that you can do. Now that you have a new power-up, you're in the same area, but there's a lot more available to you now, which I think is really cool. And I think that's what's good about a game based on exploration. You have this set area, and you go there, and there's not a lot you can do. But as you get more assets and as you get further in the game, you realize this tiny area is so much bigger, which I think is such a cool thing to do. It opens up doors, and that's exactly what Metroid as a series does incredibly. Persona 5
does more with little space, with less space.
Oh, exactly. Persona 5 is very linear, so it's a very massive game, but it's a very linear game. Like you said, Metroid Prime is a smaller game, but it doesn't feel small because of how much it lets you open as you progress further on into it. So I think that's what's impressive about Metroid Prime is it's not that big, but it's big, you know? It makes you feel like the world is so much bigger than it really is, which is an impressive thing to do.
The other point that I want to bring in, which is one of the biggest points that I've had in terms of Metroid, and that we have to remember, is the fact that Metroid games kind of skipped a generation. Not a generation, well, a console generation, so yes, technically a generation. So there was a lot of worry, the fact that these old school Metroid games, the Metroidvania style that was coined as a term that we still use today, was founded a while ago, and basically the move for Metroid to go first person was definitely one that people were worried about. And we have to remember that this kind of style of game, when it's brought into the 3D world, first of all, if you take a look at Super Metroid, which is again, this might frustrate people. I personally don't enjoy Super Metroid as much, but then again, I'm just a piece of shit. But the jump from Super Metroid, which was already a legendary game, and I can say it's one of the best designed games I've ever played, to Metroid Prime, was massive for one. It delivered on the promise, and it also was able to bring in that style of gameplay into a first-person shooter. And that's another thing that's, again, Metroid... I see people kind of skip over that point. Metroid just as a series, like again, it started off with very simple roots, but the jump that it made was insane, and you could see the backlash when they completely abandoned it for Other M. That style of game went on for a trilogy, and each one of those are extremely critically acclaimed. Like in my mind, I think there's certain lists that I even saw listed them as one of the best shooter games ever, even up there with the likes, again, with like Halo 3 is what we were talking about in the last video. There's a reason why this game is so fantastic, and even though I don't have childhood ties, or I don't have I haven't even played this game. I've just been, literally all of this is me talking from Big Mike. So I'm basically telling you guys Big Mike's arguments on why this game is fantastic. And he's right. In terms of what this game does, I don't think this game falters in almost any aspect. He's had complaints about some of the other ones. I think Metroid Prime 2 Echoes is his favorite. But he's right. In this game, I would say is one of the most consistent games that we've ever debated. Like Breath of the Wild had weapon breaking. Mario Odyssey had coin grinding or whatnot, or is too easy. In Metroid Prime, I don't think it really has a weak point that's hard to hit it on, and that's one of the things why it makes it so strong.
It's funny, on an aside, the 4 games we have left, there's only one game that I feel like has flaws that are legitimate. The other 3, and I'm not gonna say which one, I'll save that when we get to that part, but the other 3 games, I feel like all resonate with what you just said. Because Persona 5, I feel, is the same. I can't
it's so
think
consistent.
I can't think of anything to really knock it on. The only thing is the amount of exposition, but that's such an integral part of the game, you know? Like, the backtracking in Metroid Prime can be a knock, but that's a part of what makes that game so special. And if those things weren't there, these games would be less than what they are. So
yeah, they both have their target audience. So, if you don't like exploring a map, Metroid Prime is probably not going to be for you, because there's literally nothing else other than exploring and shooting the various aliens. And then Persona 5, if you don't like a lot of dialogue, you're not going to like it. I love the turn-based combat, and I was mentioning this before we even started recording with Mike. I'm I love how it's a turn-based combat, and yet it doesn't feel stale yet, because there's so many different things that go into the battle, whether it's balancing your SP amount, getting 'cause even your when you interact with people in the real world, it gives you different elements in battle as well, like the baton pass, so you're able to pass it off if you get a critical hit, whatever. So there's so many different ways of going about battle, and then you can also take the masks, or take money, or take an item, or just kill them and get a little bit of both.
yeah.
Yeah, do you want to... Can I throw something in right here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to know what's another thing, too, is we usually try to talk about talk about how it's innovative on how some of the games, on how the games came in the past in terms of like how it differs from the genre. The other thing that's hard about this is both games innovated extremely, extremely well. So JRPGs can seem as like a very like easy template to follow, where if one of your first games you're either designing like a Galaga-like game or like an RPG where you just have stats and whatnot. And Persona 5, I don't feel falls into the same trap that a lot of JRPGs do, in terms of switching up the UI, in terms of making turn-based combat exciting for people who hate turn-based combat systems like Pat. And that's one of the like it creates a different mold that it can be followed. And it was the same way with Metroid Prime. It created a different mold that could be followed, and it just adds another layer on. We can't even separate on which one really was, on which one wasn't innovative, because both of them were.
What I think, one of the things that they do separate on, it's a minor thing, but I guess we might have to look at minor things, is replayability is almost an impossibility with a game like Persona 5, whereas with Metroid Prime, it's not. Metroid Prime, you play through the game one time and you get a certain aspect of the story, but if you play through the game a second time, you might find things you didn't find before. Persona 5 has less of that. There is a good reason to play the game a second time. It's impossible to build a perfect connection with every character on your first playthrough. It just won't happen. So the second time you play through, you connect with different people, and it'll lead to different attributes being better for you in the future of the game. The issue is, even though that would give you a different playthrough of Persona 5, the game is so long and the story is so detailed that there's a lot you would have to sit through that you probably wouldn't want to sit through. All those surprising twists wouldn't be as fun. Metroid Prime, lacking a story, with exposition, really helps itself in terms of replayability, because then there's no part that's boring you. You're not having to sit through the same cutscenes because there's not a lot of cutscenes, You don't have to sit through the same dialogue because there's not a lot of dialogue. And so I think Metroid Prime offers itself to getting replayed over and over again, whereas Persona 5 doesn't as much. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
I would say so.
The other thing I'm trying to figure out, too, though, that goes to Persona 5's favor, I think, is how memorable of an experience it is. Metroid Prime is a great game. It's great with exploration. But Persona 5, the stuff it talks about and, the characters and the development that you see makes it such a memorable experience to me. I don't remember a ton of Metroid Prime, and that might be just because it blended with the other Prime games. But Persona 5, and I played both these games around the same time. I did a playthrough of Metroid Prime, and I watched Travis do it a little bit before I started Persona 5. So they're both relatively fresh in my head, but Persona 5 is the one that I so significantly remember, like, little points about. So replayability I'd give to Metroid Prime. In terms of being a memorable and lasting experience, I think I'd give that to Persona 5. I don't know. I don't know what other factors they would differ on. Soundtrack, maybe, but they're both great.
Maybe emotional impact. That's all I'm thinking of in terms of which story might be able to hit you harder, and that could give Persona 5 the edge there. Maybe. Yeah. I'm just saying because Metroid Prime doesn't try to tell like a story that's going to hit you in your heart. Really, it doesn't. But Persona 5 does.
Yeah, gameplay's great on both. There's no comparison. Music's great on both. I guess it comes down to emotions with Persona 5 story and the exploration in Metroid Prime. It's hard to compare exploration and emotion. And
I would say so. But I think we have to coming up because we're getting around that time.
We do.
So closing thoughts?
I guess, are there games that are more emotional than Persona 5? And are there games that do exploration better than Metroid Prime? Right? Let's not compare them to FPS and JRPG. Let's get bigger, because clearly these are two of the best games in those areas, if not the best.
I would agree.
So, is Metroid Prime the best exploration game we've ever played?
Oh man,
And is Persona 5 the most? And I guess I'm the only one that can really answer that right now. Is Persona 5 the most emotional game that I've ever played? And which one ranks higher on that respective list? To me,
all right, Travis.
That's hard because like.
I'm just thinking like closing thoughts for Travis.
Yeah. Because like for me, if I'm trying to compare with the emotional, like, I'm only on like the first half of the game, so like I definitely got emotional when the attempted suicide happened, because that just hits really close to home for me because of what my past is. And then, but like, I don't think I've ever been so engrossed in just like, hey, there's like a little tiny little bit of tunnel over there. I wonder if I can go over there, plant a couple bombs, if it's going to open up and find something like Metroid Prime did. So, oh man, it sucks. Final Four sucks.
I know. I guess to open up the voting, exploration is awesome in Metroid Prime, but there are other games I feel like I enjoyed it in more or equally. Persona 5 story, to me, is kind of unmatched.
Just vote it then, man.
My heart, I don't know which one deserves to be there more, but I think I am going to vote for Persona 5.
Go ahead, Travis.
I think it's stuck with me.
Oh man, why do I have to go, man?
Also, what's tough about it is that both of these games are going to age very well too. You can't even give it an edge on that.
Yeah, well, Metroid Prime already has, and Persona 5 will too.
Yeah.
So, Travis?
Oh man. It's so hard because I've been having so much fun with Persona 5, but like I wish I knew what the end game was at this point, but obviously I don't want to spoil it for myself.
Everyone dies. All the hearts get taken by Joker. He becomes evil.
He is actually
I will say, Travis,
hearts.
I will say, and this is just my opinion, you could have a completely different opinion. I think the first half of the game is better than the second half. The second half isn't bad at all. I think it's phenomenal. But I think the first half is more memorable.
It's more memorable and emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I'm going to give my point to Persona 5 as well. Just because, like, I definitely have gotten really connected with these characters that have been introduced so far. And like I said, I can't stop playing this damn thing. I'm supposed to be studying for my NCLEX, and
all right.
I've been playing this game.
Well,
but Metroid Prime definitely deserves to be the top 4 of this series. Like, it deserves to be where it's at, and it has had the hardest frickin' lineup of any of these games so far.
Yeah, it certainly has not had an easy journey by any stretch. So for formality's sake, Nick, what was your vote going to be?
My vote's for Ocarina of Time. Put the picture in there, Mike. Put the Ocarina. No, I'm kidding.
God.
Yeah, and then instead of doing the whole Hunger Games whistle, just put an ocarina of doing it.
Right.
Yeah. No, the case that you can make, Mike, is fine. But in terms of I feel like in what Metroid has done in terms of game design, in terms of exploration, in terms of show don't tell gameplay. No, I know you love Persona 5, and I haven't played it for myself, so you can take it with a grain of salt. And even though I love JRPGs, in terms of game design, JRPGs don't lend themselves to be more innovative in that way. And I think it's a fault of the genre, as I said before, but in terms of what Metroid is able to do for first-person shooters is just worlds beyond what's possible for a JRPG to do. And the fact that Metroid Prime had such a huge leap was just such a critical success in every possible way. And there's a reason why the fact that Metroid Prime 4 is delayed is pissing off so many people. It's obvious to me in terms of having a concise vision, in terms of game design and game mechanics and exploration, everything leans towards Metroid Prime. And I'm sorry, I haven't played either of these games, and I've heard Big Mike and Mike rave about how much they love them. From what I've heard, the case is Metroid Prime.
Okay. So
I mean, which is completely fair. Like I said, I was really struggling.
Yeah, they're titans in their fields. It's hard to pick. But 2-1 vote. Persona 5 is our first championship rounds match thing. Wow, I really stumbled on that one. It's the first game that made it to the finals. Again, this is going to be the only one we do in this video. In the next video, for our second semifinal match, we have Wind Waker taking on Halo 3. I'm sure that'll be a fun one as well. So we'll see you in that video. Adios.
Bye.
Bye.